Yeah, you're audible, ma'am.
A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all to the lunch of symposium on day one of EpiNeurocon 2020. With us today are my co-chair, Dr. Nasram Garu, and the speaker, Dr. Muralidhar Y. I take immense pleasure in introducing my senior, Dr. Muralidhar, who's a sedulous man. He is presently affiliated to Care Hospitals, Banjara Hills, Hyderabad. Throughout his academic career, he has many honors, rewards, and recognitions. He is the best outgoing student in his MBBS batch. Got 5 gold medals in MBBS, university topper in second MBBS. His special interests lie in neurosonology, neuromuscular and neuroimmunological disorders, stroke and cerebrovascular disorders. He maintains stroke and neuroimmunology registries at Care Hospitals, Banjara Hills presently. He conducted neuromuscular ultrasound workshop in 2018 NERVCon 3. Today, Dr. Muralidhar is talking on novel immunotherapeutics in myasthenia. Over to you, Dr. Murli.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, you are all audible. Please continue, Dr. Murli.
Sir, now I would like you to start.
Hello. Are my slides visible,
Yeah,
sir?
yeah, visible and audible. Please continue.
At the outset, I would like to thank the organizing team for inviting me to deliver this lecture. And I also thank the chairpersons for their introduction. I would like to convey my acknowledgements to my mentor, Dr. JMK Murthy, who has actually encouraged me in this field of neuroimmunology and neuromuscular disorders and stroke. Today's my topic is novel immunotherapies in myasthenia gravis. So before going directly into the immunotherapies, I would like to just give you a brief outline about the myasthenia gravis and also the basic immunology underlying the myasthenia gravis. So as you all know that myasthenia gravis is a disease of the neuromuscular junction. This is actually a very comprehensive slide to show how actually the myasthenia gravis develops. You all know that actually whenever there is a nerve impulse that traverses through the nerve ending, the calcium enters through the presynaptic membrane, and the calcium which enters into the presynaptic membrane, it actually unites with the presynaptic vesicles, and the presynaptic vesicles carrying the acetylcholine, it actually comes and merges with the end plate. As a result of which, by a array of the proteins of SNAP5, SNARE, and or synaptobrevin and synaptotagmin, the actually acetylcholine is released. Once the acetylcholine is released, it actually joins the acetylcholine receptors. It attaches to the receptors on the post synaptic membrane, and as a result of which there will be end plate potential. Initially, the miniature end plate potential. Later, the full blown end plate potential develops. Whereas in case of myasthenia gravis, the actually acetylcholine receptors are actually clustered. There are antibodies. The number of the receptors on the postsynaptic membranes become very less. As a result of which, the end plate potential also reduces, and as a result of which, the fatigability also, which is a hallmark of this disease, develops. So once actually the acetylcholine attaches to the postsynaptic membrane, as you can see here, the sodium enters into the sodium channels. The sodium channels open. As a result of which, the sodium. the sodium enters into the postsynaptic membrane. In addition to that, the action potential traverses onto the T tubules, and as a result of which the dihydropyridine receptors and ryanodine receptors open in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The calcium which is sequestrated in the sarcoplasmic reticulum comes out through the ryanodine receptors onto the musculoskeletal proteins, as a result of which the famous excitation contractions coupling which happens as a result of which muscle contracts. But this is not so simple. So it is not just the acetylcholine receptors which are present on the postsynaptic membrane, but to maintain the acetylcholine receptors on the postsynaptic membrane, we need a lot of other molecules also. The other molecules actually which are important are, as I have actually mentioned here, they are MLAD complex. That is M, you mean musk proteins, A, agrin receptors, and L, LRP4 antigens, and D, DOC7. This whole complex, that is MLAD complex, it actually helps in stabilizing the acetylcholine receptors and prevents it from clustering with the antibodies. So this is the way actually the neuromuscular junction works. So, coming to the next slide, there are various pathogenic antibodies which are discovered in autoimmune myasthenia. Right from 1975, which is initially in the first antibodies which were discovered are AChR antibodies, followed by in 2011, Hodge et al. Discovered the MuSK antibodies. And in 2008, they actually found that the acetylcholine receptors which are present in low titer, there are clustered acetylcholine receptor antibodies. And in 2011, the LRP4 antibodies were also described. So all these antibodies damage the postsynaptic membrane, causing the characteristic fatigability and the disease called myasthenia gravis. And this is just a snapshot view of all the antibodies and the clinical features. So myasthenia gravis is a female predominant disease, but the predominance of the female gender, it is much more prominent in the MuSK antibody disease in the ratio of 9:1. Followed, it is also female dominant. The ratio of females to male ratio in AChR receptor antibodies is 3:1, and in LRP4 it is around 2.5:1. And acetylcholine receptor antibodies, which we commonly encounter in our clinical practice, they are divided into EOMG, early onset myasthenia gravis, late onset myasthenia gravis. If the onset is less than 40 years or more than 40 years, TAMG, that is thymoma associated myasthenia gravis, and OMG, ocular myasthenia gravis, if the symptoms are restricted only to the ocular muscles within 2 years, even at the end of 2 years. MuSK antibody disease, it is characteristically associated with the faciobulbar weakness. The bulbar muscles are very much severely affected in MuSK antibodies. Whereas clustered and LRP4 antibody diseases are usually of milder phenotype. Of more important to this lecture, and which is more important, pertinent to this lecture, is the IgG type and the complement fixation strategy. The IgG type is very much important. The IgG type which are actually seen in MuSK antibodies are IgG4 type of antibodies, whereas in AChR clustered and LRP4, they are more of IgG1, 2 or either 3. IgG4 has a very important role, that it has a very poor complement fixation, whereas rest of all the IgG type of antibodies, they are complement fixing antibodies. This is the reason why rituximab works more in MuSK antibody diseases, MuSK antibody myasthenia gravis, when compared to the other type of myasthenia gravis. And coming to thymic pathology, it is more of thymoma in late onset myasthenia gravis, which are also associated with anti-titin and ryanodine receptor antibodies. Whereas in EOMG, that is early onset myasthenia gravis, hyperplasia is more common. AChR is more common, followed by the MuSK and rest of the types of myasthenias. So after just giving you a brief overview of the myasthenia and the types of myasthenia, let me actually go through the immunobiology of myasthenia. To understand the immunotherapeutics and how various new immunotherapeutics and the existing immunotherapeutics works, we should know the immunobiology. Actually, what happens in a myasthenia gravis? Myasthenia is a T cell dependent B cell disease. I mean to say, initially there is a thymus gland. There are autoreactive T cells. There are three regulatory T cells in the in thymus. These are autoreactive T cells. These actually develop, they stimulate the B cell to develop antibodies against the acetylcholine receptor or what other proteins in the postsynaptic membrane. So this is a simplistic model where initially the seed is a thymus. In the thymus, there are autoreactive T cells. From the autoreactive T cells, the B cells get activated and the B cells switch to develop the antibodies against the postsynaptic proteins. So this is simply. So till now, there are various immunotherapies which are available. The thymus, we do thymectomy. There has been a lot of confusion till recently whether to go ahead with thymectomy or not because of the confusing literature, which I want to dispel through this lecture. And various immunotherapy suppressants that we use like azathioprine, cyclophosphamide, tacrolimus, methotrexate, and even mycophenolate, these all work on the T cells and B cells at various levels. And immunomodulation, which actually polish the immune terrain. These are the rapid therapies which are IVIG and plasma exchange. These are all the therapeutics which are available till now. I just want to, so these are all the existing immunotherapies and the landmark trials which I actually tabulated. So which I want to, I don't want to go into detail. So, but despite the existing therapies of all these therapies, there is a large unmet need. Myasthenia gravis, which was initially discovered in 1900s, was labeled as myasthenia gravis because it is a grave disorder. Because the chances of death is almost 80%, mortality is 80%. But with the major advances in the mechanical ventilation and various immunotherapeutics and antibiotics, the myasthenia gravis is largely a grave disease. Is not mainly a grave disease nowadays. Actually, we don't see much of mortality in patients with myasthenia gravis. So it has all been because of the immunotherapeutics which have been developed. But despite this, less than 10% of myasthenia patients achieve complete stable remission, that is MGFA post-intervention status group. And however, the practical goal actually is most of the patients will be on better 5 prednisone, that is 5 milligram of prednisone, or at least we can achieve the minimal manifestation state or maximum pharmacological remission. It is very difficult to achieve the chronic stable remission with the existing immunotherapies. And 15% of the patients are refractory. Refractory, we mean they don't respond to more than two immunotherapies. So there is a large unmet need even in the with the presently existing medication. Hence, there is a lot of need for the novel therapeutics. So this simplistic model, we want to just complicate it, and I would like to show in detail. So initially there are thymus. Thymus, there are autoreactive T cells. Autoreactive, there are various antigen presenting cells. The AChR antibodies are lysed in the thymus, and these are presented to the T cells. The T cells are actually are the CD4 T helper cells. Over the T helper cells, there are toll-like receptors. The AChR antibodies are linked to the toll-like receptors, but in addition to the linking of toll-like receptors, there should be also stimulation of co-stimulatory receptors like CTLA and also IL-2 receptors. When there is also co-stimulation of IL-2 and CTLA in addition to TCRs, there will be release of the various cytokines and also chemokines. The cytokines are IL-1, IL-6, interferon gamma, interleukin 17, and also TNF. So once these T cells and various cytokines and chemokines are released from these autoreactive T cells in the thymus, these go on to actually stimulate the B cells by using various receptors. These attach to the CD20, make use of the CD20 receptors, CD40 receptors on the B cells, and BAF, that is B cell activating factor receptor. So these receptors are very important. Once these B cells are activated, they go on to transform into short-lived plasma cells and the long-lived plasma cells. Some plasma cells are short-lived, they die off, whereas long-lived plasma cells are actually stored in the bone marrow for longer periods of time. So we will go into the in-depth about the role of these long-lived plasma cells in the immunotherapeutics in further slides. These long-lived and short-lived plasma cells, they receive the immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins are protected from lysing by the FcRn receptors. FcRn receptors also we will go through in the subsequent slide. These immunoglobulins make use of the complements. That is, they form the membrane attack, membrane attack complex, and they go on to damage the postsynaptic membrane. So these are actually a gist of the immunobiology of myasthenia. Actually, for all the novel therapeutics and the new therapeutic agents can be actually targeting either the thymus or the T cells or B cells, short-lived plasma cells or long-lived plasma cells, or immunoglobulins, FcRn receptors, or complement pathways. So I've actually concised and consolidated the existing literature into these steps. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'll go on to see each and every level what has been the present literature about the novel therapeutics in myasthenia. Step 1, that is level 1, is about level 1 is a thymus. So till just 3-4 years ago, that is till 2016, there has been a lot of confusion in the clinical practice whether to go ahead with thymectomy or not in myasthenia gravis. This is because there has been retrospective series which showed that thymectomy patients fared better, but that too at the end of 5 years. And that too, the modality of thymectomy, whether to go for laparoscopic thymectomy or whether to go for extended open thymectomy, was also not so clear. Literature was not so clear. All this confusion about the thymectomy has been dispelled by this latest trial in 2016, which is published in NEJM, which is called MGTX trial. MGTX trial. This actually randomized patients between 18 to 65 years of age of non-thymomatous generalized myasthenia gravis of duration less than 5 years, who are AChR positive and who are MGFA grade between MGFA group between 2 to 4, and they have actually employed extended transdermal thymectomy versus alternate day prednisolone, and they compared this with the alternate day prednisolone. And the outcome measures which they have done in this patient were timed QMG score and time dose of the prednisolone and the need for the other immunosuppressive therapies and or acute and any acute exacerbations between the two groups. Let us go into the results of this trial. So this is the result of this trial. These are the two primary endpoints of this trial: quantitative myasthenia gravis score and quantitative time prednisolone dose. As you can see, the line diagrams actually start diverging from almost 6 months only. So it has been showing that there was a significant difference between the QMG score and also prednisolone dose in patients who were on only who were in a thymectomy with prednisolone group. So this is a primary analysis. As you can see here, the primary endpoints, the p-values are very much significant. Whereas in the subgroup analysis, the p-values are not significant. When you go into that, they actually patients who are female, they fade better, and patients who are less than 40 years, they fade actually slightly better. As you can see here, they actually fade much better when you go into the subgroup analysis. So coming to the number of the events and also the exacerbations, the number of the events were very much less in patients with thymectomy group in this trial, and the number of the events which require the medical or surgical interventions were less. Number of the complications during hospitalizations were also less. The hospitalizations mostly due to the exacerbations are much less in patients with thymectomy. These are all within 3 years. So suggesting that in patients who are females who are less than 40 years and in patients without thymectomy, without thymomas, non-thymomatous myasthenia, thymectomy definitely has a role, and it showed that patients are less dependent on alternative immunotherapies, less dependent on patient fared better with respect to the QMG scores, and patients had lesser exacerbations in thymectomy group. So this resolved the long debate of whether to go ahead of thymectomy in patients with myasthenia or not. That is the level 1 level, what I mean to say, the level 1. Let us go to level 3. That is level 2 is T cells. Because there is no much evidence on the T cell immunotherapeutics, I want to just deal it in a snapshot at the end of the lecture. The level 3, coming to the B cells, there is a lot of discussion and also lot of research going on in the B cell depletion therapy in myasthenia gravis. So before just going directly into the trials of B cell depletion therapy, I would like to just show the B cell maturation, how the B cells mature. Initially, the stem cells, they change on to the pro B cells. Pro B cells go on to pre B cells. Pre B cells go on to develop the immature B cells with IgM antibody receptors over the surface. When they develop IgD receptors too, they are called naive B cells, and they go on to develop into mature B cells, going on to plasmablasts and finally the plasma cells. So out of all these things, except means this the immature, naive, and also mature B cells, plasma blasts are present in the peripheral circulation, whereas rest of all the things are seen in the bone marrow. Out of these, CD19 and CD20 expression is most important. CD19 expression, the CD19 are nothing but the receptors. These are present from the pro-B cell lineage, pro-B cell level till the level of the plasma blast. Whereas CD20 are present between the pre-B cell, from the pre-B cell stage till the level of the mature B cell stage. So when we are giving the CD20 therapies, it is these cells which actually get depleted, not from the peripheral circulation. So this is about the maturation of the B cells. B cell depletion therapy, actually lot of research was done, and we all know that a lot of therapeutics in the regarding the rituximab, which is anti-CD20 antibodies. This is one of the first trials of myasthenia gravis, musk myasthenia gravis, where the rituximab was tried. This is in 2012, published in Green Neurology, where they have actually randomized patients of 17 patients of both musk myasthenia and ACHR myasthenia with a median follow-up duration of 31 months, and it is a retrospective design. And the methods and the outcome measures was they have actually checked for the post-intervention status of myasthenia gravis foundation and the need for reinfusion, and the median or mean dose of the prednisolone, median or mean dose of other immunotherapies, and the antibody titers. You can get all this in a snapshot in this graph. As you can see here, on the left hand side, we are actually on the x-axis is the number of the months after the rituximab. The patients were followed up for almost 36 months, that is 3 years. As you can see here, on the left hand side, the musk antibody, there were 6 patients of musk, out of which only 1 patient was in group 5, rest are all were in the group 4b. In ACHR antibodies, the patients split up into group 5, group 4b, and group 3. And after giving the rituximab infusions in these patients, most of the patients of musk myasthenia, they achieved R, we mean the remission, and 2 patients were in minimal manifestation state, which is actually a good phase. Whereas in ACHR, I means the patients improved, and 1 patient was actually unchanged. And as you can see the titers of various antibody blood levels here, the ACHR antibody levels did not vary much. But as you can see, the musk titers have gradually declined to almost nil, less than 10% in this chart. As you can, this trial actually paved the way to show that musk antibody titers markedly decrease after treating with rituximab, and ACHR titers may not improve, and the improvement may not be much. So then this is 2016 article by Hehir et al, which actually evaluated the rituximab in anti-musk myasthenia, which is highly quoted and highly cited article. In these patients, this is a retrospective design, and they randomized 55 patients of musk positive myasthenia gravis with a median follow-up of 3.5 years. And they've actually studied, these are the outcome measures. This is the myasthenia gravis status and treatment intervention score. This MGSTI is actually like an MRS scoring, which is we use in the stroke and other neurological disorders, which I will go through in the subsequent slide. And the percentage of the patients on minimally manifestation state or better, and the median or mean dose of prednisone or median or mean dose of other immunotherapy. So as you can see here, this is the myasthenia gravis status and treatment intervention score. These are the various levels based on the myasthenia gravis status, whether it is pharmacological remission, minimal manifestations, or chronic stable regimen, and the treatment which is received and the dose of the treatment. If the immunotherapies, the number of the immunotherapies, if there are 1 immunotherapies or more than 2 immunotherapies, they are actually divided into 6 levels. So as you can see in this patient, the patients in this trial, the graphs, the line diagrams, they were actually diverging, and the patients who were treated on rituximab, the MGT score was actually falling well early in the course of the therapy when compared to patients who were not. That is a control group. Not only this, not only this, even the number of the hospital admissions, the median post-intervention status, and also the number of the other immunotherapeutics also very much reduced in patients with rituximab, suggesting that the rituximab has a good effect in patients with MuSK myasthenic patients. So that is about the MuSK myasthenic patients. But in the initial review of 2012 article, there were only very few patients of AChR receptor antibodies. So there was actually a systematic review of analysis in Muscular Now, where actually there was a systematic review of the existing literature till that date, which was shown that almost they studied about 99 AChR myasthenia gravis and 57 MuSK positive myasthenia gravis patients, and these are various actually studied in this group. As you can see here, this is the multiple logistic regression where it shows that the rituximab works better in patients with MuSK antibodies titers, and it works better in patients with age less than 45 years, and it works better in patients with mild and moderate grade of myasthenias. So that is the literature of the systematic analysis. Then we go on to the latest article. This is just a latest article published in April 2020. So this is a comparison between the rituximab treatment of new onset. So this is the actually kind of myasthenias which we routinely see in our clinical practice. Whether it is a new onset generalized myasthenia, should we start rituximab in the initial, or should we wait after some time giving the alternative immunotherapies? Or we either see a refractory generalized myasthenia patients where actually patients were being tried on 2 or 3 immunotherapies and the patient did not respond. So such kind of patients, whether they respond to rituximab or not, was the crux of this trial. So this trial included only AChR myasthenia gravis. It did not include MuSK myasthenia, and it included both refractory patients who were tried on multiple drugs and even new onset generalized myasthenia. It included 72 patients with a median follow-up of 1 year. However, it is a retrospective design. The outcome measures were, it is a time to remission, use of the rescue therapies and alternative immunotherapies. Rescue therapies, we mean rescue therapies are IVIG or plasma exchange. So this is actually the way patients were actually taken. This is just 24 new onset patients and 14 untreated patients of myasthenia, 34 refractory myasthenic patients. And from the this 26 new onset myasthenic group acted as a control. As you can see here, when they have subdivided the rituximab exposure between the new onset myasthenia gravis, that is 24 patients, and the refractory myasthenia gravis of 34 patients, the rituximab worked in both patients. But thing is, it worked even in new onset generalized myasthenia, AChR positive myasthenia gravis, suggesting that earlier we expose the patient on rituximab, the better may be the response when compared to the other drugs. When compared to the other drugs, I'll show in the next slide. When compared to the conventional immunotherapies, the rituximab has a more better outcome in patients with new onset disease without any other alternative immunotherapies. So the remission at 24 months with rituximab group and conventional immunotherapies groups, obviously the remission was much more. So this study suggests that in AChR antibodies too, starting uh, rituximab at an earlier phase has a good outcome when compared to the other alternative immunotherapies. So there are though this has come, there are other various studies. These are all the latest studies last 6-7 months. One published in European Journal of Neurology, one published in Journal of Neurological Sciences, all show that they respond, rituximab even works in patients with AChR positive myasthenia gravis. I'm not going into details of these studies, but the gist of these studies, 3 studies, is they respond, AChR antibody receptor AChR positive myasthenia gravis also responds to the rituximab. So you can go through these articles. That is the gist of these studies. These are the latest articles. Next, coming to the other B cell depletion therapies, having actually heard a lot about anti-CD20 rituximab, there are other anti-CD20 antibodies too, which is obitinizumab and ocrelizumab, which is actually which is approved in in multiple sclerosis, RRMS, and also progressive multiple sclerosis and ofatumumab. There are various other anti-CD20 antibodies, but there have been no trials on these till now. But there have been a case reports which were showing that patients who were already on some other drugs, some other diseases which required these medications, they had good remission of myasthenia if the patient had myasthenia also. This is one case report which I am actually showing. The difference between rituximab and the other monoclonal antibodies is the rituximab is actually because there are two types of biology which is going on at the neuromuscular junction. One is complement mediated and another is non-complement mediated, that is NK cell and antibody mediated. So antibody dependent cytotoxicity. So these are actually may work in the antibody mediated cytotoxicity types. So level 3, there is also a lot of discussion about BAF pathway, that is B cell activating factor. B cell activating factor is very, very important to actually keep the B cells alive. It will help in sustaining the B cells. It will help in maintaining the B cells. So when we actually develop the antibodies to BAF pathway, it could also work to prevent the lysis. It could lyse the B cells in a way. It could help in remission of myasthenia gravis. That was the hypothesis. So this is actually the BAF. As you can see here, BAF, the one in the light green, which I'm actually pointing out, this actually starts expressing from the level of large B cell, and it fades off by the mature B cells. So there was one trial which was actually published a couple of years ago. So this is the drug is belimumab. Belimumab is an anti-BAF factor. This is a monoclonal antibody against the BAF pathway. So, but this study turned out to be negative, unfortunately. So this is a negative study. So coming to the third receptor on the B cells, that is CD40. We have dealt with CD20. We have dealt with the BAF pathway, which is negative, and we are dealing with CD40. So CD40 and 40 ligand. This is also very important pathway for T cell dependent B cell activation to develop the for the development of antibodies from the B cells. So there are trials going on in this also, but these are actually not clinically at now point, they are not clinically much important. So coming to the level 4, that is from the B cells we get plasma cells. Plasma cells are again short-lived plasma cells and long-lived plasma cells. In multiple myeloma, there is lot of research, there is lot of about the long-lived plasma cells. You all know about the ubiquitin proteasome pathway. The ubiquitin proteasome pathway is useful for actually removing the unnecessary material from the cells. So this ubiquitin proteasome pathway in the long-lived plasma cells, we can target it so that these long-lived plasma cells we can reduce. So it is all the study. There is a lot of research work going on the bortezomib therapy. Bortezomib is it is a drug which acts on the long-lived plasma cells ubiquitin proteasome pathways. These could help in myasthenia gravis too. There have been case reports till now. There is a series also published, but there have been no large-scale trials on the bortezomib. So next, coming to the another important pathway, that is the level 6 complement pathway. From antibodies, plasma cells, we get antibodies, and antibodies work along with the complements to actually lyse the postsynaptic proteins on the postsynaptic membrane. So as you can see, I'll just go through this pathway because this complement pathway is important, because the rest of the subsequent slides deals on this. As you can see, C1 complex, the C2, C1 complex is broken down to C2A, C24B. These C2A and C4B together they form the C3 convertase. The C3 convertase help in the C3 hydrolysis into C3A and also C3B. C3B is again attaches to the C5 and it breaks into C5A and C5B. A's are all not useful. The C5B and it combines with the C6, C7, C8 and C9. These are all the complement factors to form the membrane attack complex. Membrane attack complex together they form a pore in the cell, where as a result of this there will be lot of swelling of the cells and lysis of the cell. So that is the way actually the complement system works. Once the antibodies attach to the complements, there will be complete cascade of the complement cascade which forms. So now there are various levels at which we can actually inhibit these complement pathways so that there will be reduction in the damage to the postsynaptic membrane. So that is one the well-known drug is eculizumab. Eculizumab is a drug that actually prevents the cleaving of C5 to C5A and C5B. So we know that eculizumab is actually FDA approved in 2017 in myasthenia gravis. So this is one of the initial phase 2 trials of eculizumab. So which I am showing here. This is the phase 2 trial of 14 patients of refractory generalized myasthenia gravis, where they have actually given 600 milligram weekly doses of eculizumab followed by 900 milligram of 2 weeks, and they have actually duration of 24 weeks. And these are various outcome measures. And it has shown to be actually positive. After this favorable results of this phase 2 trial, they went on to do the phase 3 trial, that is the famous REGAIN trial, which is published in 2017. The safety and efficacy of the eculizumab. This is a placebo controlled trial. This is a phase 3 trial. They have randomized the age group more than 80
10 నిమిషాలు నేను ఫోన్ చేస్తా.
into 1:1 group, and they have enrolled patients with MGFA class 2 to class 4 with MGA ADL score of more than 6 who had Neisseria meningitis vaccine, because Neisseria meningitis they are known to occur in patients with complement deficiencies. So they have given the doses of 900 milligram every week, and followed by that every month they have actually given 1200 milligrams every fortnight, and the duration is for 26 weeks. And the outcome measures is they have actually seen for the mean change in the myasthenia gravis at 24 weeks. So I'll just rush through. So this is actually a positive trial where the primary endpoint were very significant. So myasthenia gravis ADL scores and also the QMG scores were significant in this. However, the secondary analysis, there was a lot of confusion, and there was subgroup analysis, there was not much difference. They actually actually pointed out that trial designs and all those things, there was a discussion about why the subgroup analysis and secondary outcomes were not significant, but the primary outcomes were significant. This is a positive trial. So as you can see here, the minimum point improvement, the 8-point improvement from the point 3 to point 4, there was a lot of significant difference between the placebo and eculizumab, and even the QMG scores were also significant in that way. So next, coming to the long-term effects, this trial of phase 3, which I have shown just now, is only 26 weeks trial. Then we go on to long-term therapy. The long-term results of the REGAIN cohort also shows the same thing. So same thing. So REGAIN trial, this is till the REGAIN trial which we have actually done. Then there was a blinded induction phase, and they've again randomized the patients to eculizumab and placebo groups and safety follow-up. This is almost 4 years. So again, the results were almost similar. Even in the long-term results also, the bi-weekly eculizumab infusions had much benefit and good outcome. So this is actually the post-intervention status. This is just published 2 months ago in the neurology, Green Neurology, shows that actually even the post-intervention status groups also, they have improved with eculizumab. So there are other drugs also. There are other drugs. Ravulizumab, actually eculizumab, this is more pharmacokinetically more better drug. So it had a good pharmacokinetics and longer therapeutic action. So that trial is going on in myasthenia gravis in this, and still we may expect the results in 2024. So next, coming to another drug, zilucoplan. Zilucoplan, actually it is a subcutaneously administered complement inhibitor, C5 inhibitor only. So which was actually which was actually tried in patients with moderate to severe myasthenia. So this is a trial which was published in 2018. So as you can see, zilucoplan trial was also actually superior. This is a positive trial, shows that the need for the rescue medications, the need for the alternative immunotherapies were less. So next, another most important drug is actually FcRn pathway. So what happens to the immunoglobulins once they are released into the plasma? Obviously, the immunoglobulins get lysed, but how do they get lysed? They get lysed by the FcRn receptor. So this is the FcRn receptor. Once they bind to the FcRn receptor, they are actually bound to the FcRn receptor in the endosomes. That is in the endosomes, because of the multiple lytic enzymes, they get lysed. So what we can do actually is when we develop antibodies to the FcRn receptor, we can actually prevent the immunoglobulins from lysing. So the immunoglobulins they can be of longer half-life. Uh, no, FcRNs actually they help in preventing the lysing of the immunoglobulin. So if you develop the antibodies to the FcRNs, actually we can reduce the immunoglobulin levels in the serum. So that is the actually idea of actually developing antibodies against FcRn pathway. There is a lot of literature on this. One drug which is most tried is efgartigimod. This is a phase 2 trial of 24 patients with generalized myasthenia gravis of 1:1 randomized control trial to see for the safety and tolerability of the Argins. Argins. This is called as Argins. So secondary objectives are myasthenia gravis, various outcome measures of myasthenia, 4 weekly infusions, and it showed that there is a lot of improvement, significant improvement of the myasthenia gravis ADL scores, and there is a rapid reduction in the total immunoglobulin levels, and there is a disease improvement correlated with the reduction of the pathogenic antibodies. So there are other drugs also. This the trial which is going on. These were published in the recent neurology journal. The results, and there is another more pharmacokinetically more better drug, that is rozanoliximab. This is a drug also which works on the FcRn receptors. These are various other drugs. So another level 5, to actually smoothen the immunological terrain, we actually have rescue therapies like IVIG and also plasma exchange. So now there is actually other subcutaneous immunoglobulin also is one company is trying to launch. So this subcutaneous immunoglobulin has a usually is given weekly or bi-weekly, and it has a steady pharmacokinetically. It can cause steady rise in the levels of immunoglobulin. It can be self-administered, and it can usually it will have some local reactions. So subcutaneous immunoglobulin was also shown in some trials to have very good response in myasthenia gravis exacerbation. So this is one trial published in neurology. So that's all. Um, Next, coming to the level 2, this I just wanted to brush through. T cell receptors also have toll-like receptors, IL-2s and CTLAs, and there are various chemokines and also released from the T cells. So there are interleukin-1 antagonists like etanercept, infliximab, and adalimumab, which are actually used in rheumatology widely. There is a CARE series in 2008 which showed that patients who are treated with this can have some response, and IL-6, that is TOSI, also can show some response. And there are receptors, abatacept, which is an antagonist of CTLA4 receptor, and also IL-2 receptor. There are some trials going on, but there is nothing has come out of this. So ultimately, so the summary, this is my last slide. So as you can remember from the first of the slide, thymus goes on to T cells goes on to activate the B cells with various receptors. They go on to develop short-lived plasma cells and long-lived plasma cells. From there to immunoglobulins, and the immunoglobulins are actually preserved by the FcRn receptors. They go on to unite with the complement, and complement they go on to damage. They form the membrane attack complex and damage the postsynaptic membranes. So if we actually sum up whatever literature that have suggested, we have now the literature of thymectomy, which is a proven in early patients, in females and aged less than 40 years, and patients who in non-thymomatous myasthenia gravis, and it is a very well proven that thymectomy will have some role. And coming to the T cells, there have been not much randomized trials on this. Some are actually going on. There have been a case series, that is IL-1, etanercept, tocilizumab, ruxolitinib, and abatacept. These may also be coming in the pipeline. So, and coming to the B cells, there is a lot of literature about rituximab, that is anti-CD20. In addition to that, there are some other anti-CD20 like ocrelizumab, and BAF dependent, which is a negative trial. There are some more trials going on, that is BAF, belimumab, and anti-CD40, which is an ongoing trial. And coming to the short, all these CD20 therapies which I told, actually they act on the short-lived plasma cells. And there are proteasome pathway defects which actually act on the long-lived plasma cells. This is bortezomib, which is a well established drug in treating multiple myeloma. And in patients immunoglobulins, there is SCIG, that is immunomodulation. And FC antibodies against FcRn receptor pathway, they actually lyse the immunoglobulins which are developed. These are efgartigimod and other drugs. And there are complement pathway defects to complement path antibodies, that is eculizumab, ravulizumab, and zilucoplan. And this is not actually an immunomodulator, but there has been a trial about the skeletal muscle troponin activator, that is tirasemtiv, which is a troponin activator. So this is about the gist of all the novel immunotherapies. And out of these, the things that are actually now recommended and which are actually approved by the FDA are eculizumab and rituximab. These are actually approved, and even thymectomy. These are SCIG. These are the approved drugs. Rest are all in the trials, and maybe we may get to see good answers in coming 2 years. Thank you.
Ma'am, as we're running short of time, we can take only one or two questions, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, very good presentation, Dr. Muralidhar Reddy. Very good presentation on pathogenesis and recent advances in immunotherapy. And for a shortage of time, and I raise one question: what is the rituximab administration protocol present?
Yes, yes, sir. Actually, there are various regimens where rituximab, how the rituximab is administered. The commonly used regimen is actually we give 1 gram every fortnight. That's all, and we repeat the cycle at the end of six months. That is a commonly used regimen. But there are other regimens also, giving 500 milligrams per day of rituximab every week for first 4 weeks. That is one more regimen. And there are some even which I did not actually tell and highlight in this. There was one trial on low dose rituximab, that is 500 milligram of rituximab every 6 months. Continuation of that drug. There are various regimens, but commonly practically we use is 1 gram of rituximab we give on day 1, and we repeat the same dose at the end of 15 days. That's all, and we repeat the complete course at the end of 6 months. That is one answer for your question. And the second answer which I wanted to tell you is the way the CD19 and CD20 cells get depleted also varies depending on the patient. We actually take and repeat the cycle at the end of 6 months. But when you check the 6 months CD19 cells, the CD19 cells may not be less than 1. There has been a study on the pharmacokinetics and the B cell depletion therapeutics, how the B cells get depleted after giving rituximab, which has been published, I think, 1 year ago in Green Neurology, where actually it has been shown that patients with higher body surface area and females, they actually tend to actually lose the rituximab effect earlier. That means they actually within 4 months the CD19 cells become normal. So actually, we usually give at 1 month and also at 6 months. But it is after seeing patients and the CD19 levels and things, what I feel is we have to give the first cycle of rituximab, check the CD19 levels at the end of 4 months, and from then on check every month. When the B cells, when the CD19 cells count is less than 1%, that is the time exactly to administer the next cycle of rituximab. It may not be always a rule that we have to repeat at the end of 6 months. At the end of 6 months, when we check the B cells, they may be more than 1% only. So that is the answer. Anything?
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? I could not see the box here, question box. Over to Niharika and Neelima.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Nilima, if there are no more questions from the audience, I would like to put on one from my side. Dr. Murli? Sir,
Niharika. Yes.
sir, actually, we are seeing the recent times that some patients of myasthenia are not really coming out of the rescue therapies during their myasthenia crisis, during the early part of the disease only. Say we give plasma exchange, patient is on ventilator, multiple plasma exchanges, high dose steroids in the beginning itself, but not coming out of the ventilator. And obviously, infection rules there, and it's becoming a vicious circle. So, as a rule, thymectomy is an elective procedure. So what they say is thymectomy first 5 years, then first 3 years is the best, and yeah, patient has to be stable enough. In such a case, of course, for thymic carcinoma and thymoma, we straight away take the patient to get thymectomy done and back to ICU with the rescues back again. If no thymoma or thymic pathology was there on the scans, what do you think will be the next line? Say rituximab is also given in such a case. Patient is on high dose steroid, rituximab, plasma exchange is going on, infection on. What next?
You mean you want to you are asking a question whether to go ahead with thymectomy in that patient?
Yeah, emergency thymectomy in such a case without thymic pathology.
No, without, yes, the MGTX trial actually shows that it is all non-thymomatous myasthenia only. Thymoma, anyway, we do thymectomy. In non-thymomatous myasthenia, we do thymectomy, but the results actually shows that it is not thymectomy is not a rescue therapy or an emergency therapy. Even if you do thymectomy also, the effect of the thymectomy will last more than three years. So it may not be immediate effects that you see. We have to actually employ the rescue medicines which are available to us, like rituximab and plasma exchange and IVIG and SCIG only. We can give those are the available therapies right now. But thymectomy, if you ask for an emergency situation, no, thymectomy we don't actually clinically see any benefits in the emergency situation. We actually stabilize the patient properly and then only go ahead with thymectomy, and even the results may not be immediate too.
Is there any specific immunotherapy effective recommended in a subgroup of antibody subgroup of myasthenia gravis?
Antibodies are, yes, sir. Now actually in patients with myasthenia, the rituximab therapy is the drug of choice in the early phase. But there has been a literature that is coming now that even in AChR antibodies, giving in the early phase the rituximab, it has more superiority when compared to the conventional drugs. Conventional drugs like azathioprine and mycophenolate. Yes, myasthenia, if you encounter, we straight away go to rituximab therapies only, no other alternative therapies. So if you encounter an AChR antibodies, as I have shown in the JAMA article, which I have shown just now, that when compared to the alternative immunotherapies, even rituximab also has a more better outcome, employing the rituximab at a better outcome. But that is approved for myasthenia.
So one more addition, what we are doing for rituximab, post-rituximab CD19 is we are actually looking at CD19 after 4 to 6 weeks after the first dose of rituximab. And then after looking at the titers there at the end of 4 weeks or 6 weeks, then give a subtotal, maybe half the dose of the regular rituximab we employ, say 500 milligrams at that particular point if it is not really reaching the targets. And then look back at 6 months rather than starting at 4 months and then following it every monthly. We are looking at 4 weeks or 6 weeks, then one shot of half the dose of rituximab, and then look back at 6 months straight away.
That is actually true. One comment to that point. Actually, it is actually always wise to calculate the dose of rituximab as per the body weight, body mass. I mean, body surface area. Especially in pediatric patients, body surface area should be very important to calculate and give rituximab.
Yeah, do you think that place of thymectomy is changing with the current immunotherapy?
Sir,
The
can you
place
repeat
of
that?
thymectomy, do you think that place of thymectomy is changing with the current immunotherapy?
I don't think so, sir. Thymectomy has a role. It is in addition to the other drugs. As you have seen in the trial, which I have actually shown there also, thymectomy was done in addition to the other immunotherapies also. They are not patients. Thymectomy cannot be replaced. Thymectomy is not a substitute for alternative immunotherapies. It is a addition and complementary only. Maybe
think we should-
patients who had thymectomy, they receive less drugs.
As we are running out of time, to conclude, Dr. Murli, it was a clean presentation, even though it's elaborate. Yeah, I'm taking a wild guess. Maybe construction of recombinant AChR antibodies, which are actually blocking the binding site of the pathogenic antibodies, may be the future. You covered the entire signaling pathway from B cell till T cell till complement and decreasing the titers of antibodies in the serum. Say maybe the future would be blocking those antibodies with the construction of recombinant AChRs. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We
Thank
shall
you.
go on to the next session.